أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Ahmed Selim Tekelioglu. I'm the Education and Outreach Director at CAIR-Philadelphia. Alhamdulillah, today we are together with you all for a very exciting program. Our program is being delivered by two expert names. I just wanted to give you a brief background on what we'll be doing. Our agenda is that our speakers, Fatima Iqbal from Azzad Asset Management based in Virginia, and attorney Ejaz Sabir from Sabir Law Group, many of you I'm sure are familiar with, are two expert names to talk on our subject today, Islamic inheritance and financial planning. As a civil rights and advocacy organization, one of our mission goals and statements is to empower our community. And this subject today, we are together with you as many thanks to one of our community leaders, one of our mentors, one of our leading supporters, for which we are grateful, Brother Iyad Taqiyuddin and I. We were talking, and it was his idea for us to develop a program that could give informed and expertly opinion on the subject of Islamic inheritance and financial planning. I'll invite him in a minute to say a few words. Before that, just a very quick housekeeping notes. We are holding this program in Zoom's webinar format. You are able to hear and listen us, and our participants are listening. We are going to have a Q&A session. All the questions that were submitted before have been reviewed by our panelists, and many of the points have been built into the presentations. But at the same time, you have the option to pose your questions under the Q&A button that you see. Over there, you can just type in your question, or if you don't want to type in, or if you can't type in currently, once we go to the Q&A button, there is a raise hands button that you see. If you press on that, I am going to be able to unmute you, and then you can ask your questions, inshallah. We are also joined today by Brother Bashar Qasem from Azzad Funds, who is the president and the founder, and he will be joining us in the Q&A session as well to shed light on some of the questions. I know that our speakers will also start their presentations with some disclaimers so that our expectations are clear from the program. But we are grateful to you all for joining us today, and we hope that this program and many others like this will continue to empower our communities, including those who may not have too much money and maybe can't do financial planning even right now, like me, but that it's an important subject. And at the same time, inheritance is a very important matter, both from our Sharia, but at the same time, local laws and knowing that and being prepared is important. So without further ado, what I want to do is to invite Brother Iyad maybe to tell us for about a minute how, why from his perspective as a community leader, this subject was important, to give us some context. And then we'll start our program. So Fatima Iqbal will start first, and then we'll go to Brother Ejaz Sabir. Again, thank you for joining us, and we hope to be within our time limit today and have an efficient program. Bismillah, Brother Iyad, if you don't mind just sharing a brief insight with us.
Thank you, Brother Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank the panelists for the time and the valuable information they're sharing. About
Brother Iyad? Okay, I think we are having a bit of connection problems.
I apologize. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Did you hear anything that I said?
It was a bit muffled. If you briefly review, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, I'll start over. How's that? It's not that long.
Of course.
Okay, all right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, again, and thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank the panelists for their time and for the valuable information they're sharing with us. The idea of holding a webinar about Islamic inheritance and financial planning came about and became more important and relevant because of the current situation we're in, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. People started to seriously think about the importance of having a will and planning for the day, which may be sooner than we think. Every one of us wants to make sure that our loved ones are taken care of and that a clear plan is in place to secure and protect their rights. I hope you'll find today's webinar beneficial and thought-provoking tool that will help you plan to have peace of mind. Thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Sister Fatima Iqbal or Brother Ahmed.
Yes, thank you so much, Brother Ejaz, for this. Once again, welcome to everyone. We'll start off with our first speaker, Fatima Iqbal from Azzad Asset Management. And then we'll go to Brother Ejaz Sabir from Sabir Law Group. Once again, before we start, please note your questions in the Q&A button, and that will help us to review a written question form. If you want to speak at the end in the Q&A button, you just go next to your name and you just use the raise hand button, and that way we'll be able to unmute you and you'll be able to ask. Sister Fatima, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Brother Ahmed, Brother Iyad. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. I hope everyone is doing well. Inshallah, today we're going to be talking about halal financial planning and then also estate planning. As Brother Ahmed said, there's a lot of content. We're very pleased to get excellent questions that were sent in. So we did try to gear the presentation based on those questions. And inshallah, at the end, we'll try to leave enough time to also get to any questions that you might have. Now, just to also let you know that the information that we're presenting today is general in nature. It's not going to be specific to any one particular circumstance. And of course, it's important to seek personal, financial, and legal advice based on your situation. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about identifying and understanding haram transactions. So before we actually, enter into the marketplace, before we actually enter and start thinking about how should we invest in a halal way, what we should do with our 401ks, with our IRAs, it's really important to understand, what these transactions are. And, it actually, we actually learn from our traditions that even Umar ibn Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, actually prohibited the buyers and sellers from entering the marketplace without first knowing the rules of riba. So that's why we really wanted to start with this first. And also Khalifa Ali radiallahu anhu also said, whoever does business before learning the fiqh of transactions, you'll keep running into riba again and again. And with today's financial society and situation, it can be very complicated. So we thought we'd bring together some information to hopefully help you identify riba and things that you should stay away from, and then talk a little bit about how you can do that or implement that. So this may be a verse in the Quran that you may be familiar with, but if not, in the Quran, in the second surah, it says, "Those who devour usury will not stand except as one whom the evil by his touch has driven to madness. That is because they say trade is like usury, but God has permitted trade and forbidden usury." So again, there are a lot of opportunities that we as Muslims can partake in, but we have to be aware of those rules. Now, some basic red flags that are good to identify riba and haram. Like I said, in today's financial transactions, there's a lot of terminology that can be confusing. It can make it difficult to see, it may sound very nice, but is this riba, is it not? So riba really can be identified by money that is guaranteed to grow by the mere passage of time. simply because time is going on, that money is growing. So that's an easy way to see, is there any underlying investment? Is there anything that is causing this money to grow other than just time? If you see an investment that has terms like risk-free and guaranteed, also realize that that could be a red flag to identifying riba. And any growth that is not based on the actual use or value of an underlying asset, product, or service, like I said earlier, just based on the mere passage of time, that can also be another red flag for interest or riba. Also, any money that grows just by lending and borrowing. So, bonds, for example, are transactions that are actually lending and borrowing transactions. So the money that accrues on a conventional bond, that is interest, because it's simply money that is growing because of the lending and borrowing transaction. Also, it's important to make sure that you avoid trading debt. Again, this is something that sometimes is not very apparent. You may have a 401k where you can buy bonds, but a bond, again, is a debt. It's a debt tool. And so that's why trading assets or trading debt is prohibited. So that's another reason why you have to be careful that whatever you're investing in isn't a debt. And of course, we're familiar with gambling concepts, but gambling can also be something that can be embedded in a financial transaction where there's one clear winner and one clear loser. So don't think of gambling just on, going to the casino or something like that. It could actually be embedded in a financial transaction, wrapped up very nicely, but could have elements of gambling in it. And then conventional annuity and insurance products, because they have those elements of gambling in it. It can have elements of riba in it. So again, it's very important to be careful about that. And one thing that I would definitely say is, make sure that you understand the underlying transaction. There are many nice labels, marketing labels that can be put on things, but don't rely on those labels. It's very important to understand the transaction, understand exactly how that money is being made. If you're unsure, definitely ask questions. Know when you need to get help. Don't be afraid to ask those difficult questions. And if you're looking at something and you feel like you're being pushed into it, definitely take your time to understand what it is. Like I said, where the return is coming from. Don't immediately go to those investments that just have the flashiest returns, or it's the latest investment trend that everyone is talking about. Those may not be suitable for your particular situation. And with that, you have to understand that any kind of investment comes with a level of return, which everyone is excited about, but there's also risk involved. So you have to know how much risk that investment has, how much risk you're willing to take, and also how much return you need, so that you can make sure that the investment that you're looking at is going to be appropriate for your situation. So now getting into kind of the more practical aspects of cleansing your order, how do you actually implement halal investing? Again, an ayah from the Quran, "O you who believe, do not consume one another's wealth unjustly, but only in trade with mutual acceptance and satisfaction." So, we've been, of course, hearing a lot about things that happen in an unjust manner, and we have to be very careful that actually our money is not something that we use as a tool for doing something that is unjust. And again, this goes back to just creating a deeper level of awareness amongst ourselves of how our money is used, and how can we use it in a way that will again be just. So when it comes to halal investing, the industry has really grown leaps and bounds. We're no longer at a point where financial industries like us at Azzad, we're relying only on a few opinions. Alhamdulillah, now there is a nonprofit body called the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, AOFI. You can look them up online. They have a website where they actually also publish their standards. So they create standards for Islamic finance relating to investments, takaful or insurance products, zakah, and these standards are put together by the leading Islamic finance scholars from around the world with a consensus based on the schools of thought. So we're no longer in a situation where we have to rely on the opinion of a few scholars, but alhamdulillah, we have now an Islamic finance industry that is very robust. Amazingly, even non-Muslims are finding this industry attractive. But again, with AYUFI guidelines, this is what we at Azzad use. It is the standard now for Islamic finance guidelines. And again, like I said, I'd encourage you to go to their website. You can Google them, go to their website, and even download the standards to learn more. Now, implementing it, what does it mean when you have a halal investment? What does that mean? Does it mean you can't invest in certain things? And those things that you have to avoid are any sort of company or business that is dealing with certain lines of business. For example, we have some listed here. For example, companies that derive revenue from alcohol, from unethical media, from tobacco, from areas of conflict. At Azzad, we've implemented a few extra ones. We included, for example, fracking as an environmental screen, and then we also added private prisons as well. But AYUFI again has guidelines in the types of companies that you must avoid if they generate revenue above a threshold. You also have to avoid companies that have certain financial ratios such as excessive debt, excessive receivables, and excessive cash equivalents. So, again, this can be challenging, obviously, if you're doing it by yourself. But there are solutions available. There are halal mutual funds. For example, Azzad, we offer 2 mutual funds, the Azzad Ethical Fund, the Azzad Wise Capital Fund. There are a few other mutual fund companies, the Amana funds, the Iman Fund, that have options available that do offer different levels of screening. At Azzad, we really try to be very, very conscious of the screening process. And so again, like I said, you have to be very careful that halal is not just a label. You really understand what it means and what how it can really be implemented. So what we do is we first screen all the companies in a particular universe. So let's say we're taking a look at large size companies. We're going to screen all of those, and then based on that, we have a portfolio manager, an institutional level manager that selects the stocks, but we have to monitor them on a monthly basis. So halal investing doesn't mean that you just, one time do your due diligence and that's it. Because companies are dynamic, you have to regularly review them. And so we monitor our holdings monthly. So if maybe a company was okay last month, but this month now they've taken on some subline of business that's not permissible, we actually have to remove them from the portfolio. And then a really important component is also, of course, your Zakah and your purification. Now, Zakah, I know most people are familiar with. What purification means is, if you're investing in a company which may have a small, insignificant amount of revenue, less than 5%, and you're not investing in that company with the intention to benefit from that revenue. Let's say the company generates 2% of revenue sales from alcohol. Let's say like as an airline, right? And they sell alcohol on their flights, but it's a very small percentage which they may not report, or it's insignificant. AYUFI rules that you can invest in it because, again, it's an insignificant amount, and again, you're not intending to benefit from that portion, but you must purify it. So you must get rid of that even insignificant amount of revenue in order to keep your portfolio halal. So like with our funds, we offer a purification calculator you could use to know exactly how much revenue might have come from that area. And again, like we have a screening process that we use again, to help make sure that the investments we're using, again, follow these guidelines. Now, just an example, in terms of screening process, a lot of people feel, well, I can just invest in a technology ETF, right? What's wrong with technology? But there are many different aspects to an industry. For example, if we take a look at Apple, Apple may pass the screening process. But if we take a look at IBM actually has a credit wing that they use to finance, for businesses, and they generate a significant amount of interest from it. So because of that subline of business, in that case, IBM would fail. So there could be underlying things which you're not aware of. You have to be very careful. And like I said, again, that's where halal mutual fund or an investment advisor who understands these rules and is regularly doing might be able to help you. And again, like this is just an example of our Zakah and purification that we do for our clients. Now, I know in the Q&A we got some questions about Zakah. Again, that's a whole other seminar, webinar. that we could do and talk about, but inshallah, if there's any particular questions, we may be able to address those at the end. Before I get into the estate planning aspects of it, people did have questions about, if I have a 401k or an IRA, how can I make sure that it's halal, or how can I invest it in a halal way? One thing is, of course, take a look at your investment options. If your employer offers you a 401k, see if they have any halal investment options. Are there any halal mutual funds you can pick? A lot of the cases, they're not going to be automatically listed. They're usually, employers give maybe 10, 15 different funds that you can pick from. None of them will have halal investment mandates. So what you can do is you can ask your 401k, or sorry, you can ask your retirement plan provider if you can have what's called a self-directed 401k. Now, with a self-directed 401k, it will usually be linked to a brokerage company where you can then go and buy any investments that you like, which include halal mutual funds. So that's a great way to be able to do that. And same thing with IRAs. IRAs are more flexible, so you can go and find halal mutual funds to invest in, which can actually make it a lot easier to make sure that your investment grows in a halal way. So we're going to transition now to talking a little bit about Islamic estate planning. Now, of course, estate planning is a type of planning that you need to do in order to prepare and make sure that you have all your, all your assets prepared, so that when you pass away, or when there's a situation, your family is taken care of, as Brother Ejaz was mentioning. So the first type of planning that really you need to think about before we even get into wills is incapacity planning. So that's planning, for example, what happens if you get sick and you're in the hospital? Is there somebody who has the power of attorney to pay your bills for you, or to be able to, deposit a check, or do various different financial aspects? Also, do you have somebody who you've designated as a healthcare power of attorney, somebody who again can make healthcare decisions for you if you can't? So that type of planning is, of course, very important. Then there's inheritance planning. What happens to your wealth whenever you pass away? And then there can also be special circumstances. So some families may have situations where they might have an elderly relative, or a child with special needs, or various different circumstances where they may need additional planning. This could also mean like asset protection planning, for example. If you want to make sure that you're protecting your wealth from potential creditors. A lot of professionals that are in professions where there's there's chances of being sued. Again, this is typically a large concern. So these different special circumstances can also be addressed under estate planning. As I mentioned, incapacity planning. Incapacity can strike anyone at any time. So it's really important to make sure that you take care of this before, God forbid, something like this happens. Because if you can think your family is in a situation where they're trying to make decisions that are in your best interest, but they don't have the power to, they can feel very helpless. So very important to make sure that you have those power of attorney documents, the healthcare directives in place, so that you can actually make sure that what you want is what actually happens. Now, going into the inheritance, when we at Azzad started really working on developing our knowledge about the inheritance, we came across this hadith, which is actually very eye-opening, and I think will speak to a lot of us, where Abu Hurairah narrated that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Learn the discipline of inheritance and teach it. It constitutes half the knowledge, and it's prone to be forgotten. And it will be the first discipline to be pulled out from my followers." And I know I'm with probably many of you that before I actually started working and growing up, I didn't have a very clear understanding of what does Islamic inheritance mean. So hopefully, this will be able to shed a little bit of light on that. And again, inshallah, we can really help understand and learn this discipline so that it isn't forgotten amongst us. Now, when we talk about characteristics of Islamic inheritance, it's different than if we were, maybe just sitting down and talking about, okay, who do I want to give my money to, right? Under Islamic inheritance, one of the key differences is that natural heirs actually have a right to inherit. So going back to that concept of justice, Establishing an estate plan under Islamic guidelines means that you are being just to your heirs, because they actually have a right to inherit. And by doing this type of planning, you are protecting their rights. So we're not talking about a situation where I want to give, all my money to this person or that person. I want to leave it to my cat, or whatever the case might be, because that would be unjust. So this is our responsibility as Muslims. We have to set this up. And we'll talk a little bit about pitfalls that can happen if you don't do it. Now, the other aspect of Islamic inheritance is that it recognizes individual ownership and not joint ownership. And what I mean by that is that each individual has their own heirs. So, many of us, we may own property jointly with our spouses. That's very common, especially in the US to do. But I have my own heirs and my husband has his own heirs. So for example, we may have common heirs, like our children are our common heirs. But if I have living parents or my husband has living parents, my parents are my heirs, his parents are his heirs. And so we have to be very careful that we are identifying individual ownership of property to make sure that, again, everybody receives their share. And again, we'll go through some examples, hopefully, to help explain that. The other concept is that only surviving heirs inherit. So while many, common estate plans might be set up to say that, if so-and-so is my heir and they pass away before me, then their share just goes to their children, right? Like, so if I say, I have a mother and she will get this much, but if she dies before me, her percentage will then go to, so-and-so. Under Islamic inheritance, only surviving heirs inherit. It's very important to be able to identify which heirs are alive at the time of somebody's death. Now, with again, Islamic wealth transfer, you can gift, you can donate, you can make waqf, which waqf is really a specialized Islamic trust which can be charitable or it can be for the family. Those are all allowed during your lifetime. Before death, and of course, before you are in a situation of terminal illness or the sickness of death. So gifting you can do as you wish. You should do it so that it's fair, which doesn't necessarily mean equal. The scholars recommend that if you have, certain situations where there may be a child who needs more and that would be fair, that would be okay, but your gifting should be fair. You should not be, you should not be picking sides and just giving it to the child you favor. And then you also have flexibility with your wasiyah. Now, the wasiyah is an amount up to 1/3 of your total estate that you can give to anyone who is not a natural heir. So anyone who does not have a right to inherit. And so people may have charitable organizations they want to support, like CAIR. You may have other family members who are not a natural heir, who do not have a right to inherit necessarily, but you would like to leave them something, or you want to make sure that they're cared for. So there is a lot of flexibility in that case for making sure that also what you want can be done. So gifting again during your lifetime, using the wasiyah, these are flexibilities that are also built into Islamic wealth transfer. Now, when we talk about who are these heirs, like I said, this is really a science. And it's very interesting when you start, learning about it. But the inheritors can actually be of two categories. But just to keep things simple, there are basically male heirs and there are female heirs. Male heirs can be your descendants and ascendants. So sons and parent and father, grandfather. They can be your brothers, nephews who are your sons of brothers, uncles, sons of uncles, and your husband. And female heirs include daughters, a son's daughter, mother, wife, grandmother, and sisters. And again, the shares of these types of relationships are also mentioned in the Quran. And shares can be, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. These are all depending on the type of relationship that exists. So interestingly, the Islamic inheritance schedule is also dynamic. It's based upon which relatives are alive at the time of death and what the relationship is to the deceased. Now, all of this, is, like I said, it's a science really, And so at Azzad, what we've done is we actually worked with scholars to understand how can this knowledge be really replicated in a way that could be given to a judge, or it could be given to an attorney who may be not versed in Islamic inheritance, and they could understand all these rules. So we actually put together this chart. I'm just showing it just to kind of explain, or kind of just visually show you how many relationships there can be. I know this is very small, but actually on this, on the x-axis and the y-axis, these are all relationships, and these are all the different combinations of relationships somebody might have. So it's very thorough, very comprehensive, and so really there's guidance given to exactly how much and who should be receiving inheritance at the time of anyone's death. Now let's maybe talk a little bit about some complexities that can come up for Muslims. One of the things is, people will say, well, let me just go online, right? I can download a document, a will. But what we find is that a lot of language in these conventional wills and trusts end up being contrary to Islamic law. So of course, the inheritance schedule is one thing, but there may be other language in there. For example, stipulates that if somebody dies within a certain time frame of another, consider as if they died before them, even though in actuality they may have died after them. Islamic law requires that you keep the exact order of death because again, that dictates who inherits. Also, we don't have any Sharia courts, of course, in the US, so we really are obligated to do this type of planning to make sure that, again, we maintain justice and make sure that those heirs who have a right to receive will receive their inheritance. And then for some families, again, preserving wealth and utilizing estate tax planning tools can be there. Over the years, the rules or the exemptions for estate taxes has significantly grown, so it doesn't really apply to most people, but for some, it may be a concern. So we're going to just quickly go through 3 different types of planning scenarios, so hopefully it can illustrate how these might work. So we'll talk about somebody who dies without an estate plan, what happens to their wealth, somebody who does die with a will, and then somebody who leaves everything to their surviving spouse. Maybe they own everything jointly. Now, if you happen to die without an estate plan, a lot of assets you might have may automatically go to a joint owner. So for example, if you have bank accounts that are joint owner, the joint owner will automatically assume 100% ownership. If you have IRA accounts, you have 401k, life insurance, and you've already designated a beneficiary, those assets will pass automatically according to that beneficiary designation. So again, if you have all your assets with a beneficiary designation or owned jointly, it's likely that everything will pass according to those. Now, if you do not have a beneficiary designation on an asset, for example, you have an individual bank account, then that account will pass according to your state intestacy laws. Now, what intestacy laws basically are what each state decides how the distribution should be. So typically, a pattern of distribution would divide the property between spouse and children. Now, in this situation, whatever you wanted is completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You didn't do a will. There's nothing that states, there's no beneficiary designation. So now the state intestacy laws will come in and actually decide how that property is distributed. So again, the problem with this is your actual wishes become irrelevant. Now, somebody who, for example, puts together a will can help avoid this. Now, a will is usually the cornerstone of an estate plan. A will is a document that can direct how your property will be distributed. In your will, you can name an executor. So, for example, somebody who you want to manage the affairs, wrap up things. And then you can also name a guardian for minor children. So people who have young children, of course, this is usually one of the top concerns people have. What will happen to my children? Who will take care of them? This is something that you can name in your will as well. And the will has to be written and signed by you and also witnessed. And I think Brother Ejaz will talk a little bit more about requirements around a will. Now, somebody who dies with a simple will, for most situations, that's really what you need to do. If you have a very complex estate, meaning if you have property in multiple states, you have large businesses, or you have a lot of what we would call an illiquid estate. You have a lot of things tied up, maybe in real estate. A simple will might be still a little complicated, and you might need something more advanced like a trust. Wills also have to go through a process called probate. Again, I think Brother Ejaz can probably elaborate a little bit more on this, but probate is basically whenever the court has to then take the will and it goes through a court process, and to make sure that the distribution is actually done. So there can be costs associated with that. A will also becomes a public document. So if you have any concerns about privacy, you don't want people to know necessarily what assets you had or who they're going to, again, there are alternative options that you can use through trusts. And again, if you have an estate that's over about 11 million, in that case, you may have an estate tax issue, and there may need to be additional planning that you have to do. So, but for most people, again, like who don't have these situations, you want to at least have a simple will in place for yourself. And now, as I mentioned before, whenever you set up a will, you can do it to make sure that you take care of your heirs. Again, these are the people who have a right to inherit. And you can also name beneficiaries under the wasiyah who can receive up to 1/3 of your assets. Again, people who don't necessarily have a right to inherit, but who you wish to leave something for. And if you do a simple will, you can set it up so that, upon your death, the distribution will go according to your heirs who survived you at that time. So for example, if somebody passes away with a wife, a son, a mother, and these would be the percentages that each relative would be receiving. Now, the last concern I wanted to go through is because this is something that a lot of people will face, because most people will own assets with a surviving spouse jointly. Now, when a surviving spouse or when two people own property jointly, it's important to understand that both people really are owning the property 100%. So we like to think it's 50-50, but in actuality, both people are really owning it 100%. So when the first spouse passes away, all the property automatically transfers to the second spouse. Now, let's use an example as I was talking before, where me and my husband, we have property. If we owned it jointly and I pass away first, all the property will transfer to my husband's name. But recall that I have living parents. So in this case, my parents will actually be disinherited. They will not receive any share because all the assets are going to my husband. So families that think, well, I want to make sure ultimately the money goes to my children, that those children might be common heirs between you and your spouse, but you may have other heirs who are different. And of course, family circumstances can change after death. There can be mixed families. There can be, additional marriages, additional children, so many situations that can arise. So really, it's important for each of us to make sure that we've done the work to make sure that our heirs will receive their right to inherit from each of our properties. So again, you can incorporate both the natural heirs and your wasiyah into a document called the last will and testament. Now, you can also, like I was mentioning earlier, combine these different planning tools. You can combine the wasiyah with the inheritance, with gifting, and you can also add on specialized trusts. Now, from an Islamic perspective, there is what is called the Waqf al-Ahli, or the family trust. And this is really a specialized revocable trust. And it can be used, for example, in situations where there may be circumstances where a family member needs to be cared for longer, situations where there might be estate tax issues. So it creates a more flexible vehicle. But again, this presentation, trusts really kind of go beyond the scope of this presentation, so we're not going to spend much time on them. But just so we had a few questions that came in about it. A trust is basically another document that can help, again, provide more specialization to protect against certain things. It can actually help you avoid probate. It can be used to minimize taxes. Like I mentioned, it can be used for asset protection. It can help somebody pass on control over property. So it can be used in various different ways. But again, like I said, it kind of goes beyond the scope. But any trust that is designed to be specialized with the Waqf al-Ahli, or a revocable trust that is specialized on the rules of Waqf, The way it can work is that somebody can contribute the property to the waqf or to the trust, where the trustee then manages the property according to an agreement. There can be beneficiaries that are named to, again, benefit from the trust during a certain time period. And then once the trust terminates, the assets have to be distributed again to those Islamic heirs who had a right to inherit. And again, the rules of waqf are very, they can be very detailed. So it's very important that if you are trying to do this type of planning, you do it with somebody who has comprehensive knowledge in waqf planning, and make sure that it's done correctly. Because again, you don't want to be in a situation where you've, not, without realizing it, now done something that is not just towards your heirs. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brother Ejaz Sabir to inshallah talk a little bit about some of the requirements for estate planning.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah, sister. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity, and I thank CAIR and Brother Ahmed and Sister Fatima Iqbal, Brother Bashar, who is waiting in the wing for a question and answer session. And I thank you all the attendees for joining today, inshallah. I do understand, I was joking earlier that people want to invest, and it's better to spend more time on investment aspect of this presentation rather than will. People don't want to think about death. So in that in mind, I will just briefly talk about three things. As she mentioned earlier, that we're not going to talk about the trust aspect because it's beyond the scope of this presentation. But we'll talk about will, power of attorney, and living will or health directive. So I use an example. For example, if I'm in an accident and I go to hospital and I'm told by the doctor that I have to bed rest there for whatever injury I have for about maybe a couple of months, and I can't move from there. And during that time frame, who can manage my office? Who can pay my mortgage, my car, my management that I have, the rental property, renew my passport, all of the things, somebody has to act on my behalf. I'm conscious, but I can't move. So at that time, some documents come into effect. It's called power of attorney. While my health did not improve and things are getting worse, and I'm gone into coma. And now I'm in a coma for a long while, and now family and doctors have to decide, should they keep me alive artificially or should they pull the plug? Who makes the decision at that time? And that's called health directive or living will. And that is some instruction that I have given while I was alive, and I made a conscious decision and spoke with my doctors and spoke with my lawyer, and I also spoke to scholars Islamically and made the decision of what should I do. Some issue comes up over and over about the organ donation, and there's difference of opinion among scholars, but again, that's something that you have to talk to your own scholar and decide. So that can be incorporated there. Well, things didn't work out well for me, and plug is pulled, and now I'm dead. So that's the time the will comes into effect. And that will that sister already mentioned in detail, according to Al-Tasannu, up to 33% you can give as a wasiyah, but in Islam, everything is pretty much written who gets what, according to Quran and Surah Nisa. But up to 33% you have leeway. So that's when we say word wasiyah in Islamic context or Islamic government, it's all written, mother gets what, father gets what, son gets what, spouse gets what. But then in that context, we're talking about a wasiyah, which is 33%. In American law in Pennsylvania, you have to have the mother, father, all portion written now, because if you don't have it in writing, that will not be treated as will or wasiyah. So in America, you're combining 33% plus 66%, whatever you do, even the rights are written in Quran, they must be written document. Otherwise, it will not be treated as a will. So a lot of time people come up with the question, brother, so there's a hadith that we shouldn't have a wasiyah. It's already wasiyah, the rights are written and what people are going to inherit. Well, unfortunately, the judges here in America will not interpret Quran. They will look at the documents, what you have written as a will. According to Pennsylvania law, the will, living will, health directive, power of attorney, it's better to notarize. All of them need to be notarized. I have to have 2 witnesses and notarized. But will is not required to be notarized. But our practice in our law firm is better to notarize, because if there is any dispute, it's better, it's an extra layer of protection. But beside will, every other document must be witnessed by 2 people and must be notarized. So must be, you go in front of notary. Nowadays, during Corona, we had issues. So how should we do that? And how do we notarize? So there are notary, Pennsylvania law has changed recently due to Corona as well, that we have remote notary and electronic notaries. So you don't have to leave your house now. So it's better to notarize these documents. You probably see the screen. That's usually intake sheet. As, somebody might ask, what should I do? How should I write a will? In Pennsylvania, I would strongly suggest to comply with Islamic law as a Muslim. You should handwrite your will right now, as soon as presentation finished. You never know when you're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can write it down by saying, my name is Ejaz Sabir, I'm living at this address, and I have my spouse and my children, and I want to divide my asset according to Islamic law. That's called holographic will, and then you sign it. That's okay if you die tonight. But that's not the highly recommended document. So you should sit down with an attorney, sit down with the Islamic inheritance people, expert like the Azzad, and other people, and then you sit down with the lawyer and write it down in detail. But to comply, that's okay. Because if you die tomorrow and you don't have anything written, then your wishes are no longer respected or adhered. So that will come to intestacy, as she mentioned, and it's up to the judge. And you don't know who's going to be guardian for your children. You don't know who's going to be your personal representative. You don't know how the debt's going to be paid, the calculation going to happen, inheritance tax. It goes through the court system. So it's a bit complicated and messy. You don't want to leave your loved one behind and to deal with that situation with your assets. So it's better to have a written will. According to Pennsylvania law, you can see on the intake sheet, then it says top portion is, for example, my name, my spouse name, and then children, and then underneath is personal representative or guardian. So obviously I need to make sure my family is written there. But according to Islamic law, the family is extended family. Your parents, other family member also inherit. So what we do is that we have two ways to incorporate that. One is that you give us this tree of your entire family who is there. And then we can do the calculation for you. But then issue comes up with which school of thought you follow. So we just recommend you to scholar, and you sit down and you go through the calculation with the scholar, and we incorporate that language in there. That's one way to do it. And what with that issue is that if you have a newborn child, the calculation changes. If somebody died, the calculation changes again. So what we do is we cover by saying upon my death, it must be distributed according to Islamic law, and that authority is given to your personal executor or executrix when the female comes into the picture. So that person will sit down at that time and say, okay, Ejaz died. Okay, he has one wife, he has father alive, mother has passed away, he has brother, sister. That is the time they can calculate. But the first thing first, one of the questions was that the debt need to be paid off first. Your burial costs, your debt need to be paid off. And there are skeleton here, as you can see. The property, personal property. But life insurance you can see there, health insurance you see there, retirement you see there. Those are not covered by will, but they must be mentioned in the will because people know what asset is out there. Those who are going to inherit something, they need to know what's out there. But they usually superseded by whatever beneficiary you have designated in the health insurance or retirement or any other life insurance. So whatever beneficiary mentioned there, so that will supersede. Will not supersede. Other than that, will, you can give any and everything according to Pennsylvania law. You can give entire stuff to your dog. I'm sorry to say that, but in New York, up to $90 million was given to dog. And the court upheld that. They say, yep, that's correct. That was the wish of the deceased person. So, hey, you can write whoever you want to. One of the questions was that spouse is separated and then remarried, and then second wife comes into picture, and who should I write? Unfortunately, that question is okay. Maybe you should contact me off the record and I can talk to, because under Pennsylvania law, we might have some other issue than will itself, the polygamy and other things. But in a will, you can write whoever you want. First spouse, second spouse, your girlfriend, your dog, your cat, CAIR, Muslim advocate, anything, anybody. So long it's within the Pennsylvania jurisdiction. You don't want to say, I want to give all my assets to Al Jazeera, or I don't want to give my asset to Cairo or Pakistan. That's fine, you can do that. But unfortunately, if there is a dispute, the American judge will not have a jurisdiction to enforce it. So it's better to have a will here and within American law and American designation. So I want to leave up, I don't want you to think about death too much. I want you to think about investment. So with that, I just want to bounce back to Sister Fatima. Once again, thank you, CAIR and Brother Ayad, and thank you for my esteemed panelists for this opportunity. May Allah give us wisdom, vision that we can adhere to it. And by the way, you want to come to me, alhamdulillah, more than welcome. You want to go to some other attorney, Allah give you barakah. But from Islamic point of view, as an Islamic student of Islam, will is mandatory. So it's in ayat, Surah Baqarah, ayah number 183 that we read now. When we see them fasting is mandatory, same language is used in the same surah 2 ayah about the will. So make sure you write handwritten tonight to comply with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You never know, you might meet Allah tomorrow. And then sit down with any attorney. You want to come to me, more than welcome. You want to go to somebody else, Allah bless you. Jazakallah khair. Just keep me in your dua. Assalamu alaikum.
All right, alaikum salam, and thank you so much, dear brother Ejaz, as well, for this. Now what we are going to do is we are going to switch over to our Q&A portion. What I want to do is first start off with Sister Mona, I believe, who has raised her hand from early on. I'm going to allow you to speak, Sister Mona. Sir Fatima, if for the moment we can stop the share, I think our audience can see the full panel. Thank you so much. We can come back to the slides. Sir Mona, please go ahead, inshallah. You might need to unmute yourself on your end. Okay. I am asking you to unmute. We'll give a minute. Maybe she had to step out for a bit. Okay, let's do this. Let's come to the questions, to the typed questions. Everyone, I think on your end, you are seeing some answered questions, but we'll briefly review them. So in the order that they were received. So one question was, where can we get these incapacity planning documents and other documents? These may be state specific. Where can you find these specific to your state? And Sister Fatima typed an answer. As you can see, she says that I would recommend consulting with an estate planning attorney in your state to make sure your documents comply with your state law. Brother Ejaz, any additional insights on that? You are on mute. It's just.
That is correct. As I mentioned earlier, and my advice is not an attorney-client relationship here. I'm just giving you general advice. But yes, it is important that you talk to an attorney of your own state. In Pennsylvania, it's different law than New Jersey. But general concept of will and power of attorney and living will is there. What issues being addressed with those documents, but there's a specific need. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a Muslim client who said, I want to give my entire body donated to science. So with the funeral, burial, all the stuff. So we have to do some extra research, and there is a special agency and special requirement through the state in Pennsylvania that if you want to do that, that's how you have to do it. So each state has different law. You must talk to your own attorney in your own state to address these issues.
Thank you for that. I think a related question that I see is, if I have a will done by a non-Muslim lawyer, do I need it to be reviewed by an Islamic or Muslim lawyer?
Jazakallah khair. I don't think the will need to take shahada, but what we need to do is that you need to understand you are at least 18-year-old, you're conscious, you know the people who's going to inherit from you, who are your relative, and sometimes the families have married where everybody is not Muslim, and the people are there. Sometimes it's cross intra-faith or interfaith marriage. So you have to talk to your scholars. There's a difference of opinion. So you need to work that out. And if you have all those things in place, then certainly you can tell the attorney, any attorney can do that. But obviously, if you want to come to Muslim attorneys, maybe they have different view or different angle to interpret it. But at the end of the day, attorney is nothing but a paid servant who will follow your wish and instruction. So you need to know who's going to inherit, who's supposed to inherit. So perhaps you should sit down with a scholar or school of thought that you follow, and then also the people from Azzad when it comes to investment aspect of halal or not, and that kind of stuff. So I think it's better to have Muslim, but it's not highly recommended. Either way is fine.
I realized Fatima posted a private answer, which means that great minds think alike. It's just exactly the same. answer, mashallah. Okay, so we have two typed questions. And in the meantime, I again invite you to just use the raise your hand button if you'd like to ask a follow-up question to maybe the questions that you posted before. In the order that they were received. The first question is it permissible for a wife to select who would inherit her wealth, different from or in addition to her surviving husband?
So I'll try to answer that one. So every person has their written heirs. So if her husband is one heir who has a right to inherit, however, she will also have other heirs likely who would have a right to inherit if she has other relationships, children, if she has siblings and no son, if she has parents. So she actually, again, when it comes to the inheritance, it's really written out, for her at least up to for 2/3 of how much of it has to be distributed. Now, the 1/3 that we've been talking about, the wasiyah, in that there is flexibility to choose additional individuals or charities who could receive, from her in terms of inheritance. But it's a good point that, again, men and women each have their own heirs. And again, as Islam has given women the ability to have ownership of wealth, women also really should recognize that they are responsible for making sure that their heirs receive their inheritance from them.
I just want to add on one more thing. It's when it comes to the Islamic aspect of it, unfortunately, the people have haqq, they have a right. So in that aspect, those people who have a right to inherit from her, they have to waive it. She cannot unilaterally say that I don't want to give to this person, that person. So in that sense, again, that we need to sit down with scholar and discuss, because you cannot, for example, I cannot say I don't want to give something to my son. Or unless one son say, okay, dad, I have enough wealth, I want to give my share to my sister, that's okay, but he has to waive it. There's a difference of opinion, or majority of scholars say these are the written right in the Quran. To the person who's supposed to be recipient, they have to waive the right. You cannot make the decision. The giver cannot make the decision. The taker has to waive their interest.
Thank you for that. I think next question, either Sister Fatima or Brother Bashar can enlighten us on is, can we transfer a 401k account from an ex-employer to Azzad? If so, what is the process? If you can provide a link.
Sure. So once you leave an employer, you have the flexibility to roll over a 401k into an IRA or an IRA rollover. And that's a good way to make sure that you can maintain control over the investments of that account. So you can roll over your IRA to Azzad on our website, azzadfunds.com. We have a few options there. You can, if you feel comfortable doing it on your own, we have some forms there. You can also reach out and request a consultation with one of our advisors. So you can fill out that form and an advisor will actually contact you and we can walk you through that process.
Thank you, Fatima. And I am posting the link to the Azzad's page on the chat so that everyone will be able to access. Okay, there are two related questions that I want to take in a group, and then there is a question from Dr. Kaiser. So the first of this is, what is the typical cost for estate planning? How long is the process, or how complicated it is? And then second related one is, what is the typical cost for executing a proper will by an attorney?
I guess that I can answer as for Pennsylvania law. Cost is under $1,000 for all those three documents. It depends how complicated your assets are, what exactly do you have intention to do. But generally, generic, I'll say about between 500 to 1,000 max. How long does it take? That the intake sheet at the end of this presentation was, and Jazakallah khair, Sister Fatima, for incorporating that in there. That is the intake sheet. If you come to my office, when you call and make an appointment, this is what I go through. So if you can download from here and just fill it up, and then just send us an email and we can prepare the documents. You don't even have to physically see us, meet us in person. So it doesn't take that long. Earlier, Sister mentioned about the privacy aspect. On this document, it says that you need to give us your Social Security last 1 digit or 2 digit. That's just for our information purposes. And one way to do it, that if you don't have any relative here, you're just by yourself, and you want to make the will, that issue came up in my practice as well. and people say, I want to have a will and I want to record in local recorder of a deed office. So when I die, people can have a public record and access. That can be done as well, so that we don't have to hold on to the original documents. It's already on a public record. One problem with that is that if your asset change, things have changed, information changed, then you need to take the old documents back and upload the new one. But generally what we suggest is that you need to focus only two aspects. Who is going to be your guardian or personal representative? That's the key information. That person will stand in your shoe. And that's the first thing you need to decide. And other than that is very simple preparation and Pennsylvania laws. So that it doesn't take that long. We can get it done within a week.
Thank you, Ejaz, for that. Okay, one additional question. So from Dr. Kaiser, is a trust only recommended for individuals who have over 11 million in assets, or is it a good recommendation for anyone who is trying to build wealth and help kids build generational wealth?
Trust is, sorry, go ahead, Sister Fatima.
I can tell you either one. Brother Ejaz, why don't you go for it?
Trust is very, again, it's not my expertise. I will not do it. I have attorneys, those will do it. But trusts are, there are various trusts, different formations. There's irrevocable trust, the revocable trust, inter-revival trust. The trust is that you're putting some assets into, and for certain conditions, certain reasoning, and that's okay. But it depends on what's your need, what's the idea, what you're trying to do. If you're trying to accumulate health, you want to avoid the probate, you want to avoid the inheritance tax from your children, or you have some certain condition to motivate some children, or you have chronically ill child to cater some extra asset for that. So again, there's different need, different basis. So there are expertise in these fields. I personally don't handle that stuff, but if you have that issue, Brother Kaiser, you have my personal information, send me a text message, and inshallah, I'll put you with the right attorney who can handle that situation. But the attorney might not be Muslim. Unfortunately, I'm the only Muslim attorney, and to my knowledge, in Pennsylvania, who does this kind of stuff. But, I mean, in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I would just add, we work with a lot of our clients to help establish waqf al-ahli, or waqf that follow the rules, trusts that follow the rules of waqf, especially revocable trusts. So it took us actually a lot of work and research to really understand what these rules are. Like I said, to make sure that the documents that you are putting together also comply with the Islamic guidelines. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions as well on that. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me and be happy to discuss.
That's wonderful, thank you. There is an additional question from Jamil Mohsin. The question is, by New Jersey law, I believe upon the passing of a spouse, the assets are 100% transferred to the surviving spouse through Islamic inheritance law, although Islamic inheritance law will dictate otherwise. How do you resolve this disparity in these inheritance rules? So I guess the question is, when secular or state law conflicts with a ruling in Islamic law or the interpretation of the scholars, what is the way to navigate?
The will solve this problem. If you have things in writing, and then you have stipulated all the assets, how should be distributed according to Islamic law. If you had a chance to sit down with your scholar and you have 3 of your family, and you have broken down the entire list of how many members in your family are, and happen to be the correct updated list, and that will be distributed, because whoever is going to be your personal guardian or personal representative, they will take their will to probate office. In Pennsylvania, it usually costs $60, and that will be, a document will be registered, and that will replace your wish, and that will be replacing you after your demise and your death. So that will solve the entire problem if you have a written will.
Yeah, I would just add that, we talked about the intestacy laws. So this is that intestacy law that we were talking about. If New Jersey, gives everything to the surviving spouse, but also be careful how your assets are titled. Now, if your assets are titled as joint ownership, even if you have a will, the assets will pass to the joint owner. So that's why it's important to make sure that your assets are titled in such a way that they're going to actually be implemented based on the will. So that would just be another thing to add.
Thank you for the point.
Thank you for that. We will be wrapping up, looking at time, in about 7-8 minutes. From the questions that we received on the registration form, there were a few that were received earlier today. So in the interest of being just to those questions, one of them was, As my grandchildren turn age 18, one of the community members asks, I am teaching them to buy and trade on the New York Stock Exchange. Is this too soon? Is there something else I should be teaching them first? I contribute $50 each to their account each morning, each month through the bank or through TD Ameritrade. But that's, you know, if this person is not a co-owner of their accounts. Any insights on this?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I have a similar situation. My son is 10, and of course, he hears what I do, and he got very interested and, you know, wanted to start in, you know, investing too. And so, you know, it's very important that before we actually teach them, you know, or give them the ability to do that, we teach them again these rules. They're entering into a marketplace, right? Like we mentioned, they should know the rules that they need to follow to make sure that they don't run into anything that will lead them astray. So while, you know, investing is very important, it's a great tool, and I commend you definitely for getting them to start thinking about it. Definitely take the time to educate them about financial planning, making sure they're doing it in a way that is prudent. You know, it's not something that they're speculating on. It's also very important that they understand how the investments can be halal. What does it mean? What is interest? What are these basic rules? So understanding and starting to educate themselves about these are very important. Like I mentioned before, there are halal mutual funds. And if a mutual fund is basically a basket of stocks or investments which are professionally managed. And halal mutual funds, the company that the sponsor is actually screening them for you. So, you know, you have a firm that's actually making sure that you're not investing in companies that have revenue coming from alcohol, gambling, tobacco, things like that. So those can be a great place to start and to use for building and again, developing healthy investment habits. You know, investing regularly is a great idea. You know, investing $50 a month, for example, is a great way to consistently build wealth regardless of what the market is doing up or down. When you do that, it's called dollar cost averaging. And it can be a great way, again, to help young adults start learning about investing, but making sure they're doing it in a healthy and prudent way.
Thank you for that, Sister Fatima. I will go through a few other questions, inshallah. One of them that we had received is whether Bitcoin investing or similar investments to Bitcoin, these new tools are halal, or is that considered gambling? I'm going to defer this question to Bashar. Bashar, I think if you can shed some light.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So Bitcoin, you got to be careful with Bitcoin, although from an Islamic perspective, still this matter is controversial. But what I would tell the people that, you know, what is your intention for the Bitcoin? If it's really, although we call it a coin, most of the scholars, they don't look at it as money, where similar to the dollar and yen and etc. Most of the people, they use it to benefit from the use of the Bitcoin, which is really transferring money and settling payments, and you know that provides certain benefits or features that regular money is not there. So to use it as if you're intending to use it as a money, then you have to be careful with this, because there is what we call the rule of sarf when you're exchanging money for money, etc. But I think majority of the scholars, they don't look at it as real money, as a money, as a currency, where although of course it has the name Bitcoin, but the scholars, they don't judge things by what you call it, but they judge it by the underlying terms and contracts of that particular assets. So Bitcoin, if you're to use the Bitcoin to transfer assets, to settle payments as a medium of transferring money, absolutely there is no problem with that. But you gotta be careful with the speculations that is going on with the Bitcoin, where you know people actually intending to use it as a money, because still as a concept of money, there are certain characteristics where what we call the ruler has to be involved to provide some kind of security or safety for that money. And I would remind everyone with the verse that Fatima mentioned, that we should not get engaged in anything that can consume each other's money unjustly. So there is still very speculation in Bitcoin. I encourage people not to use Bitcoin or to intend to use it as a way to store money, but to use it as a tool. It's exactly like when you use MoneyGram or PayPal or Visa card, where it's a way where you can transfer money. But using it as a money, you need to be very, very careful. I would say not to subject yourself where you gain money, but also, or you losing money, but also to avoid gaining money unjustly from the speculation that is going into Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin, it's an evolving concept. We see like a lot of changes going on with the blockchain, and the scholars will look at it as it grow, as it developed. So still it's a developing concept. There is a lot of potential for regulations from governments, from central banks. So as it evolves, I think the ruling or the views of the scholars will change. But right now, I can tell you, using Bitcoin where as a medium for transferring money, absolutely there is nothing wrong with that. And if you intend to invest in that one, also there is no problem. But it's very important that you understand and you align your intention from this particular concept of Bitcoin or any other type of cyber currency.
Thank you, Brother Bashar, for that. In the remaining 10 minutes or so, what I'll try to do is, I think I'll try to highlight some of the questions. Again, one other question. There are two questions that relates to the marital issues. One is, if two spouses are separated and one of them passes away, how are assets distributed in the event that assets are written in one of their names or both of their names? In this case, in the scenario, the couple is separated and not divorced legally.
It is, maybe the person should call me or or email me, because there are a couple of issues in this scenario. First of all, is they are not separated, so there's husband-wife issue. The law still comes in as a husband and wife. Second thing is, does husband has a will? Did wife has a will? The third thing is the asset that we're talking. What kind of asset we're talking about? How the assets are designated. For example, if they have a property, the deed is a normal process. You can Google and download it, but the deed has the language. If it says deed by entirety, which means it goes through both husband and wife together, and whoever die later will take over the assets. If this deed says joined by tenancy in commons, then it's a different law. So we need to know what documents we're looking, and so what asset did they have. So there are quite a few issues with this scenario. So maybe they should call me or leave me a phone number, and I can discuss based on specific, a little bit more information that I can advise them.
Thank you.
If I may add something to
sure.
what Brother Ejaz said.
Of course.
Joint with right of survivorship, this is a form of ownership. Unfortunately, it's not recognized under the Islamic law because it creates a lot of ambiguity and also creates a potential for conflict. Because when you do joint with right of survivorship, whoever survive will inherit the assets. So imagine, as we know, the inheritance under the Islamic law, it's not a privilege, but it is really a right for the heirs. And as Brother Ejaz said, this is something dictated in the Quran. It's very serious. When Allah in the Quran said, "Faridatan min Allah," it's a mandate from Allah. So you got to be very, very careful using those form of ownerships. There is also what we call TOD, transfer on death. These are problematic ownership. Maybe you want to use them temporary, but you need to really cure this by having your will or by having a trust that define exactly, upon your death, how this should be distributed. So you got to be very careful with those form of ownership, because the heirs of one spouse are different than the heirs of the other spouse. So you're going to kind of like indirectly overriding the will or the Islamic inheritance mandate. So you're going to be very careful with those form of ownerships.
Thank you, Brother Bashar. A quick question. There is a question that asks, am I allowed to write in a will that my debts are paid off?
If you see the intake sheet, I mean, you have to pay debts off, because, as we know, among Al-Sunnah, the authentic hadith, even the martyr, the shaheed, have issues with the debt. So you need to make sure, as a Muslim, all we're doing this to comply with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's instructions, and the debt must be paid. So yes, certainly the first thing you need to write down in a will is that your debt should be paid first. And then obviously, that's something that you have to address. Whatever we draft, we always address that up front.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to do it.
Yeah, also you're right, Brother Ejaz. The seniority of distribution upon the person death, number one is debt, second is the wasiyah, and the third is the inheritance, is the mirath. So that's how really the senior. So you can see there's so much emphasis on that has to be paid first from any money, even before even the cost of the funeral. That comes number one. Yeah.
Thank you. There are three questions over here very quickly that we want to go through. One is, what is the best way to protect assets from lawsuits?
Depend what kind of assets you have. Under the assets are between husband and wife. If this is under LLC, if it's in corporation, is the lawsuit already been initiated? Did you get the paperwork or not yet? You just Google and find out your name is on the lawsuit. Depending your spellings are correctly on lawsuit or not. So there are a lot of things. Unfortunately, if 2 + 2 was equal 4 in a legal aspect, then wouldn't need a lawyer. So it depends on the fact scenario. I'm sorry, it's not that simple answer. So scan and email me the documents, or email me that you have. Just make sure you mention a subject matter. This is related to the presentation by CAIR. I won't have any consultation fees. I will do free advice, but I need more evidence and more information.
Thank you, Brother Ejaz. I think, Fatima, there's a question, as you can see, about the needs for a minimum investment with Azzad funds. If you can shed light on that.
Sure. I just typed in an answer, but happy to talk about that. So we have two kind of lines of business at Azzad. Azzad Asset Management, we are a wealth management solution where we focus on solutions that really have the highest standards in Sharia compliance. And these are available to investors, again, who have a minimum of $500,000. However, we also offer 2 mutual funds which are publicly available. They're available on most public platforms, on brokerage platforms like TD Ameritrade, Fidelity, Vanguard, probably most of the platforms where you might have your 401k or IRA. And again, you can invest in these 2 funds. We use the same halal investment process as we do in our WRAP program for our wealth management. So we really maintain consistent Sharia compliance over all of our services and products, whether it be our publicly available mutual funds, which you can purchase, I think, for a minimum $50 recurring deposit, or if it's through our wealth management solution, where we have individual portfolios with individual securities that are managed by institutional portfolio managers. But again, we have various different options available. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, just go to our website, sign up for a consultation by one of our advisors, inshallah, then we'd be happy to do that for you and point you in the right direction.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm seeing a few questions that I know that we touched briefly on, but I want to review. One is about student loans. One person asked, I checked with my student loan provider about what happens to my loans when I die. They said the loans expire and my family is not held accountable for them. Is this true? The person says, I ask because I don't want that debt lingering behind when I die. And the other question from the same individual is about halal investing. How can that be done through the 401k at work?
Sure. So definitely in terms of when it comes to student loans, they can vary depending on who issued them. So you really have to go to the provider to see, you know, what the stipulations on their loan is. There are some loans which are forgiven at death. But you have to make sure that you understand exactly what your loan provisions are, because it may not be the case, you know, in all circumstances. In terms of loans, one other thing is that when you do create your will, you can also stipulate, and you should stipulate that again, all loans should be paid. That any loans that you have, because you don't want to, of course, have any loans lingering after you pass away. So your assets, you can have them be used towards paying your loans before the remainder is distributed to the heirs. So, you know, so that's very important, and another reason why you should have your will written out. And then I think there was a question about the 401k as well, which I think we talked about a little bit earlier, but how do you invest halal through a 401k? As I mentioned, the best way is to first bring up demand. You know, if you have another Muslim in your office, you know, come together, create demand, say, we need a halal investment solution. This is so important on so many levels, whether it comes to insurance. Ask your insurance agent, I need a takaful policy. Ask your 401k providers, I want a halal investment solution. Everywhere you go, make sure that you're creating that demand, because of course, not only will it benefit you, but it will also benefit those that come, you know, after you as well. And as we create that demand, you can request halal mutual funds be added to the investment options that you have. If they can't do that, another option for you might be to request a self-directed 401k. And with that, they would allow you to be able to have an account that's linked to a brokerage account, where you'll have more flexibility, again, like I said, to select your own halal mutual funds. So there are ways, but again, it's very important to talk to your provider. And if they don't have a solution, you know, really ask for it. We've heard clients who've had circumstances where they've even worked for like the state of New York, which is, you know, again, a lot of bureaucracy in terms of if you work for the state, you know, what options they provide. And under, you know, basically that you have a religious mandate, you know, they were able to gain flexibility in getting these options added. So I think, again, understanding how important these are for ourselves and then be able to communicate it to others will inshallah allow us to have more solutions available.
Thank you for that, Fatima. We are going to be wrapping up in just under 5 minutes, inshallah. One question that I want to get to was from Brother Mukarram. I don't know if Brother Mukarram, you're able to talk, was about inheritance regarding the elderly. One question I think is that, is there a way to pass on inheritance being given to the elderly with an intent not to overburden them with the needs for financial planning and the funds after making sure that they are taken care of? If I interpret the question carefully.
Assalamu alaikum. Brother Ahmad, are you referring to someone? Did someone write a question here? Because it wasn't from me, but I have, maybe someone else has posted that question.
I see. I apologize.
I have a question along the same lines, because I know myself and my wife, you know, we also have elderly parents. You know, when we pass on the inheritance, it is going to mess up their Medicare, you know, their privileges and things like that. So whether you know, their care. So how do you see that? Like, how do you plan you know, your inheritance or will accordingly?
Thank you, Brother Mukarram, for clarifying. Thank you so much.
Sister Fatima, it's for you
okay,
because it's a financial aspect to it.
Sure.
So
yes. Yes.
if I understand correctly, the question is that Brother Makram is that they're right now getting some sort of Medicaid or benefits, and if they inherit all of a sudden and the property or wealth, their benefit will be perished, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Sister Fatima, you want to take on it, and then I'll
Sure, I'm happy to. That can really be solved through special planning, especially with the special needs trust. So there are types of trust that you can establish. You can either establish them during your lifetime, or they can be established, through a will. So they would be established after your death. And with that type of trust, what happens is that the trust is designed so that it protects that person, whether it's an elderly individual who's receiving, benefits, or it may be, again, a special needs child who may also be receiving, federal benefits. If their assets go above a certain amount, they will no longer be eligible for those. And that can be very detrimental because those federal benefits are providing ongoing needs and really, something that they really rely on. So special needs trust can be integrated into a plan or into a will so that any assets that somebody in those circumstances might inherit, it would go to the special needs trust. The trust would maintain essentially control over the assets. You'll name a trustee, and that way that individual will not have outright access to the full amount, and that's what protects them from being from basically getting eliminated from their benefits. However, you're also able to fulfill your obligations because the trust can be used for their benefit. The trustee can use the trust to purchase assets for them, provide care for them, using those assets. So there are tools that can be used for that.
Any additional points, Brother Ejaz?
No, again, as she mentioned, we have to, Brother Makram, I have again my information, so she sent me a text message. It depends what assets they have, what liability they have, how much you're going to give it to them, and who can be the trustee. And there is a way around it, but you have to sit down and it has to very kind of sort of need-based and have to carve it very carefully. And then, yes, there is a way around it, but it's very, creative way to do it. But it can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. What I will request is we have literally -0 minutes to close. So there are 3 questions that I can see that I think, one is, what are 2 halal public mutual funds? From Brother Jamil Mohsin. There's a question. Halal public mutual funds. There's another question on, can we answer that very quickly?
Sure. Well, the Azzad funds, we offer 2 halal mutual funds. The Azzad Ethical Fund, it has a ticker symbol ADJEX, ADJEX, and it invests in mid-sized company growth-oriented stocks. We also have a halal fixed income fund. Now, this was the first halal fixed income fund. It's called the Azzad Wise Capital Fund. It has a ticker symbol WISEX, WISEX. And that invests in Islamic bank deposits, sukuk, trade finance, and then also a small portion in dividend-oriented stocks. And they each have different, goals. The first one I mentioned is looking for growth. The second one is for income and capital appreciation. Again, on our website, azzadfunds.com, we offer the prospectus, which will give you all the information, disclosures, fees on those 2 funds. And like I said, you can either buy them directly through our transfer agent, but very easily you can buy them probably through platforms you're already on, like Vanguard, TD Ameritrade, Fidelity, all of those.
Thank you, Sister Fatima. If you create a trust, will you transfer all your assets to that trust, including properties, business, and liquid assets? That's another question.
So I'll just quickly answer that one. It depends. Again, this is, depending on the structure of what the purpose of was that trust, there may be some assets that are transferred into it. If it's a revocable trust where it is essentially the basis of your estate plan, it may be, all of your assets. So it really depends on the type and purpose of the trust. Again, a trust can be really customized for various things There can be different income tax implications on the type of trust it is, different estate tax implications. You know, so it's really important, again, to sit down with you know, a financial planner and attorney who are well versed in trusts. Make sure that it's a good fit for you.
Thank you for that, Sister Fatima. Brother Bashar, if you can answer the next question, what are the symbols for Azzad mutual funds at Vanguard?
Yeah, as Fatima said, the Azzad Ethical Fund, ADJEX, that's a mid-cap growth fund, and then the halal fixed income, which is similar to the bond, but it's actually invested primarily in Sukuk and Islamic bank deposits, trade finance, and the ticker is the WISEX, WISEX. Those two funds available on Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, major wirehouses, they carry these two funds.
Thank you so much. Okay, what I'm realizing is we ran out of time, but at the same time, the questions that are on the Q&A portion, before we sign off, if I may ask maybe Mr. Fatima, there are a few I think that you can quickly type in answers so that our audience to receive those. I think that would be helpful. Second is we do intend to maybe briefly edit this recording and share it. So if there is information that maybe you may have missed, we will hopefully make the recording available. So we'll make that announcement. So you'll register, we have your email, so you'll be the first to receive, inshallah, if when that happens. So we want to thank everyone in our community for attending this, for showing such care and attention to this program. Again, Brother Iyad, thank you for the idea and for encouraging us to do this. Many thanks to Sister Fatima and Brother Ejaz for giving their time on this. As we've spoken, it's part of our community empowerment mission at CAIR-Philadelphia. We also feel blessed to be able to serve in that way. I think those answers are in place as far as I can gauge. So we want to thank you all for joining us. Have a blessed day, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you.